Hi everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here taking a look at the Saturday race of the day, the Grade 1 Belmont Derby Invitational for the 3-year-olds going 1.25 miles on the inner turf course at Belmont Park, race 9 on their 11 race card. And Craig, this is another very intriguing affair. We've got a field of 13 signed on, a pretty strong European contingent, as well as many U.S. runners that we know pretty well, including a couple dropping out of the Kentucky Derby. Just many places to go in this Belmont Derby.
Yeah, it's another interesting renewal. As I mentioned on our Oaks video, I guess it depends what order people are watching these in. I love these races because of our affiliation with Timeform. They give us their Timeform ratings, some really detailed comments. And it's a lot different these days watching the Europeans because you can always go find the replay. So I really enjoy these.
Let's throw up the field of 13 for this race, and this being the Saturday race of the day, you can scan the QR code in the corner of the screen to view the PPs for this race and handicap along with us to get free formulator pass performances for this Belmont Derby. Craig, there are 13 runners in this field. I struggled making a morning line for this race, to be honest. I did peg 2 of the Europeans as the top 2 choices on the line, lukewarm choices, with the number 13 Stone Age as the slight favorite and the number 10 Nation's Pride going out for Charlie Appleby, the second choice. But I'm really not sure how the public's going to approach this one.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. And I should mention we don't have a pace projector for this race, just like the Oaks, because we have so many Europeans coming in and we don't want to paint a picture that kind of gives a false impression of the pace of the race. One thing I will say about the pace of the race is whether there's a pace projector or not, if Classic Causeway handles the turf at all, he's definitely going to be a factor in the beginning of the race, even if you don't think he will be at the end.
Yeah, just because there's not a lot of pace data for this race doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be a dawdling pace, because Classic Causeway is a pretty fast horse. Emmanuel, the number 11, has done all of his best running on the front end, and Stone Age, that morning line favorite, his 2 blowout victories in Europe did come in gate-to-wire fashion. So it's going to be interesting to see how these horses sort themselves out on the front end. And speaking of Stone Age, let's jump right into his replay of him winning the Leopardstown Derby Trial 2-back. This was the race that made him one of the favorites for the Kazoo Derby. Obviously didn't show up with his best effort on that day, but he was pretty impressive winning this race at Leopardstown back in early May.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened to him in the Derby. Maybe, again, the footing wasn't to his liking, but he had run a really impressive race before that. He ran a 112 Timeform rating. He obviously dropped off in the Derby, but I was impressed with what we saw this day. I think he's a pretty strong contender in here. I do have slight concern that he's a horse who does his best running on the front end, but I do like that he drew that outside post, because I think front runners, horses that do their best in the clear, often will do just fine if they have to stalk a bit, as long as they're on the outside. And I think that's exactly where he's going to be.
Yeah, he's kind of an interesting horse. He was actually Group 1 placed as a maiden during his 2-year-old season, finally broke his maiden in his first start as a 3-year-old, and both of those blowout victories, that maiden win and the Derby trial, came in gate-to-wire fashion, him leading all the way. And watching the replays of those races, he breaks very quickly out of the gate, which I think bodes well for his chances and in potentially getting forward from this outside number 13 post position. But being drawn outside of the speed, Craig, even if he doesn't get to the front end, he should work out an in the clear trip, potentially stalking those 2 American runners to his inside.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't like him near as much if he was drawn inside with the other speed in here, but I think the post is a blessing for him.
And Aidan O'Brien did use the same pattern with Bolshoi Ballet, who won the Belmont Derby last year. Big race in the Derby trial at Leopardstown. Disappointed at Epsom, but he did win the Belmont Derby. We'll see if Stone Age can pull off the same feat here. Charlie Appleby, though, Craig, sends out another runner that's dropping out of the Kazoo Derby, and he looks like one that's another major contender in this race. Let's take a look at his victory 2-back when he won the Betfair Exchange Newmarket Stakes, only beating 3 rivals this day, but he certainly does it the right way. And the runner-up in this field, Hu Yamal, came back and was second in the Derby.
Yeah, it certainly flattered that race, and he won by 7 lengths that day. He got a 112 time form rating for the win. Not quite as good as Stone Age did in his win at Leopardtown, but certainly a good performance. And he's one that I think is a major contender in here. And we don't need to talk too much about Charlie Appleby. I mean, what he did last year when he shipped over here in the last couple years actually has been nothing short of phenomenal. He's winning with almost everything he sends over and doing so pretty easily in some cases.
Yeah, I think you have to respect any runner that this Bart is sending over for a grade one race in the US right now. And Nation's Pride, the way that he ran that race two back, and especially his victory at Maydown over the winter, suggests to me that he is a horse that is going to handle American racing very well. Charlie Appleby really seems to have his finger on the pulse of his stable to know which runners are going to do well over the flatter courses in the United States. And Nation's Pride seems like one that should take to it well. He's also got a handy up close running style, but doesn't need to be on the lead. So that should allow him to work out the right kind of trip in this race. Let's finish off the trio of runners that are dropping out of that Kazoo Derby and talk about Royal Patronage, who was farther back than the other two we just talked about, finishing 16th in the Derby. But we'll take a look at his race two back when he was second to the eventual Derby winner, Desert Crown, in the Dante Stakes.
Yeah, his credentials are fine. He had kind of similar. Didn't really show up in the Derby. Ran a nice time form rating the time before. Went second to Desert Crown, and I have no problem with anybody picking up him. It's interesting. He does get Joel Rosario in the saddle, so he gets a little local knowledge with that one that we don't have from the other two shippers that we've talked about.
Yeah, he's a horse that did some nice things as a 2-year-old. He was actually a winner of the Group 2 Royal Lodge over Caribus, who would go on to win the 2000 Guineas in England. Hasn't been quite as effective as a 3-year-old, but this was a good effort that has held up well with Desert Crown coming back to win the Derby in his next start. I was reading that this horse is going to stay in the United States after this with trainer Graham Motion, so the connections are looking to embark on an American campaign with him. So they clearly believe he's going to be well suited to American racing. We'll see if he can do well here with an American jockey aboard. Let's talk about some of the French raiders in this race. We've got two of them. We'll take a look at when they faced off in the Prix de Guiche two races back, actually, for Machete, who was second in this race. The number 1 Implementation also in here. I believe Machete is the horse in the red sleeves. That dark bay horse can be closing on the outside. Implementation closer to the pace in the green sleeves, taking over that dark bay right there. Just feels like these runners, even though they were beaten by a good one in Vidani, might not be in the same league as the top runners in Europe.
Yeah, that's my thought as well. They're rated lower by time form. And I think if I remember reading the PPs correctly, I don't think either one of them's ever won a race on turf. Both of them's success has come on synthetic surfaces. They've been racing in somewhat lower competition. So yeah, not as high as on them as I am on the other shippers.
Yeah, you can see here, Machete, his time form ratings, which you can get in the time form USPPs, are just a little bit lower than the two other Europeans that we talked about at the top of our analysis. But Vidani, who did beat him in each of his last two races, including the Prix de Jockey Club last time, he came back and won the Eclipse Stakes. So definitely a horse that is among the best 3-year-olds in Europe. It just feels like these two weren't really in the same league as him when they faced off against that one. Craig, let's move over to the American runners now. And I think among those, we should start the conversation with Tiz the Bomb. Even though this horse hasn't run on the turf this year so far, we saw what he could do on the turf as a juvenile. We'll take a look at his Breeders' Cup juvenile turf performance when he was a good second behind Modern Games.
Yeah, of the American horses, unlike the Oaks, where I think the playing field is pretty level, I don't really get that impression among the males. And part of it is I just don't think the U.S. males are fast enough. But the one exception might be Tiz the Bomb. He's a horse who got a little Derby fever with him. He tried dirt for some reason, tried the Derby. But if you draw a line through those two dirt races, his turf efforts in the synthetic races, that Breeders' Cup Juvenile turf is his only loss. And he was only beaten 1.5 lengths by Modern Games, who's had a good 3-year-old season. So of the Americans, I do think he's the strongest contender, and I expect a good race from him.
Yeah, I agree. I think getting back on the turf is really going to suit him. If you just throw out those dirt races and isolate his turf and synthetic performances, his only loss on either of those surfaces came to Modern Games, who would have been among the favorites here if Charlie Appleby had elected to send last year's Breeders' Cup winner. But Tiz the Bomb does seem to be a good fit in this race. We'll see how much money he takes as a pretty familiar name dropping out of the Kentucky Derby. I agree with you, Craig. Some of the other Americans, they do need to improve, but it feels like some of them have upside, including a couple of runners that contested the Transylvania Stakes at Keeneland earlier in the year. Let's take a look at that race, which was won by Dog. This was his third victory in a row to begin his career before he lost the American turf in his last start. Also in here is Napoleonic War, who had a bit of a trip this day and came back, finished second in the Pennine Ridge.
Yeah, I can't blame anybody for giving Dog another shot off his, I would say, not very good try in the American. That came over that Churchill course on Derby Day that we've talked about. It produced a lot of fluky results. Some horses loved it, some didn't handle it at all. He's going to have to improve, but he had been taking a step forward every single time. And even his speed figure in the American was a little higher than his previous win. So there is some room for him to move up.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a look to him because he feels like a runner that still has some upside. And being by Slumber, who seems like a strong stamina influence out of a dam that was effective going up to 1.5 miles, just feels like one that might appreciate the stretch out and distance of the Americans. And as for Napoleonic War, Craig, he's the only Chad Brown runner in this race, and he could go off at a decent price. So maybe we're supposed to give him a look just because of that, since Chad Brown has had such a strong Belmont Park spring-summer meet. But he's another one that really does need to take a step forward.
He does. And one thing you can be sure of is the bettors likely won't overlook Chad Brown, although they have every now and then. They'll let one slip through the cracks. But he's another, would have to take a big step up. Like you said, he comes out of that same race in the Pennine Ridge. He ran fine that day, but he wasn't able to beat Emmanuel, who I don't like at all. So it would be a pretty big leap for me to get to him here.
Well, speaking of Emmanuel and the Pennine Ridge, let's take a look at the stretch run of that race, as we do have 3 runners coming out of there that are competing in this Belmont Derby. We already talked about Napoleonic War. Emmanuel is the one that is going gate to wire here. He's making his turf debut in this race and obviously relish the surface switch. Also, take a look at that gray horse closing on the outside. That's Limited Liability. He finishes up pretty well to be third in this race. But Craig, Emmanuel, he's going to have to step up and trip and deal with a much tougher pace situation here while facing the best field that he's ever met.
Yeah, I'm not sure I wasn't sure what to make of him when he moved to turf. Some of his dirt races look like he'd be the kind that would be good on turf. He had went slow and finished up really fast a couple times, but another case where the connections maybe had a little bit of Derby fever, tried him in the bluegrass, and he ran okay that day. But when he ran into Pennine Ridge, I was hoping to see a similar speed figure from him if he did handle the turf. He seemed to handle it, but he didn't run particularly fast when he had things his own way. So it's kind of hard for me to see him improving much off of that effort, facing a much tougher field and probably more pace pressure.
Yeah, I do have some questions about the quality of that Pennine Ridge, but I do think that the number 12, Limited Liability, is an interesting horse coming out of that race. He was that gray horse that was closing on the outside. Didn't think there was a whole lot of movement going on from the back of the pack in that Pennine Ridge, and he was finishing best of all to get up for third that day. This Shug McGahee runner, it just feels like he's one that still has some upside. He made a big late run from last to get up to win at Keeneland 2 back, and I just think that Limited Liability is a horse that should appreciate the 1.25 mile distance and has the right to take another step forward in this race.
Yeah, if any trainer is going to have horses taking step forwards gradually and consistently, it's Shug McGahee. We see it time and time again on dirt and on turf. He doesn't rush his horses, and he's one I would expect to take a jump. The question is, will it be big enough?
Well, let's throw up our picks for this race, Craig. And we have very similar opinions in this race. We just have the same exacta in a slightly different order. You put Stone Age on top, the number 13 over Nation's Pride. I flip-flop them, but it does seem like those 2 Euros really have a strong hand in this race.
Yeah, I was torn between the two. If Stone Age was drawn more toward the inside, I would have preferred Nation's Pride. Neither one would surprise me. Of the others, Tis the Bomb, I do give him a shot in here as the American Hope. I really like this figure in that Jeff Ruby Stakes. That race has proven productive. We saw Rich Strike in there. We saw Tawny Port, who have both come back to win. So I think he's one that would have a shot among the locals.
Yeah, I gave the slight edge to Nation's Pride. I think this horse was very impressive two back, and I like the kind of trip that he's supposed to work out here, going the 1.25 mile distance. He's my top pick. If I'm trying to get some prices underneath among the Americans, I would use horses like the number 7 Dog and the number 12 Limited Liability, but they would both need to improve quite a bit to beat those €2 that both Craig and I think are going to be pretty tough in the Belmont Derby Invitational on Saturday at Belmont Park. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.